What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up with Darth Vader, but there were a few questions in relation to Star Wars comics that you guys had, and some requests as well, which, again, it's really up to you guys. I mean, I think the Star Wars comics are cool. We can cover them, right? You guys really seem to enjoy Darth Vader. The number one question you guys had, largely because a lot of you are probably fans of the Mandalorian TV show, is you wanted to know if there's a comic book series that covers the Mandalorian Wars themselves. For example, like the Mandalorian Wars Part 1 or Part 2 or Part 3. No, there really isn't. There's what's called Knights of the Old Republic, and then there's a 5-issue miniseries called KOTOR War, which basically that 5-issue miniseries focuses on the Mandalorian Wars. But the Knights of the Old Republic storyline is, think of it akin to what was going on with like Anakin Skywalker in episodes 1, 2, and 3, that like the Clone Wars were going on, and like you saw some stuff happening, but the story was mostly about Anakin. That's basically how it is in Knights of the Old Republic. The Mandalorian Wars are going on, but it's less about the wars themselves and more about the main character of the story. The other question you guys had is how these comics work. And basically, Marvel takes it in phases. This is technically phase 2. We actually kind of skipped ahead. That basically what we're doing now with Darth Vader takes place after the events of Empire Strikes Back, but before the events of Return of the Jedi. Phase 1 was basically everything after A New Hope, so episode 4. And then we'll probably do the Obi-Wan series once we get closer to the show. But continuing on here, because Darth Vader had basically ignored the request of the Emperor to return and basically brief the Emperor on what had gone on in the efforts of Empire Strikes Back to turn Luke Skywalker to the dark side, that Darth Vader had in turn gone on his own mission to basically figure out what had happened with the death of Padme, to find out if what the Emperor had told him, if there was any real truth to it. Of course, he ended up finding out the truth that basically he was not the reason Padme died, that the Emperor had lied, and so once he returned here, the Emperor immediately starts attacking him. Of course, now one of the things to know is it's kind of a bit of training is sort of what's happening here, but the Emperor of course uses Force Lightning, kind of his signature weapon at this point in time, or his signature power at this point in time. Now, of course, Darth Vader asks the question, why are you attacking me? And that's when you basically end up getting the Grand Vizier of the Emperor who steps in, right, Mustafar, and basically says, like, here's what's going on. That the reality here is that it wasn't necessarily that Vader had gone on his own mission to find out what had happened with the death of Padme Amidala and all that kind of stuff. The Emperor knew it was inevitable before Vader found out the truth, that eventually he would. The hope of the Emperor here, and it proved to be a successful campaign, as with most of the stuff that he's done, his hope was to turn Anakin to the dark side, rechristen him as Lord Vader, so by the time he learned the truth, it wouldn't matter. He'd be so far down the dark side, there wouldn't really be any way to redeem him. More so than that, as things are told here, that he basically, that it really kind of goes back to Empire Strikes Back, that Vader basically found Luke Skywalker, he was tasked with bringing him to the dark side, and he didn't do it. Not only that, he let him escape. That in reality, when Luke Skywalker fell down the shaft, right, and was literally hanging at the bottom of the Citadel in Cloud City, that what Vader should have done was gone after him, right, and then snatched him up. And even if Vader couldn't turn him to the dark side, Emperor Palpatine could. Beyond that, he left on his own personal mission, which was everything we covered in the last story. And so it's really kind of listed that basically being, at best, it's total failure. At worst, it's absolute treason. And when the question of the Emperor is, what do we do with traitors? The response of Mustafar is, we kill them. And that's when the Emperor seeks his guards on Vader. Now, the reality here is the Emperor does not actually expect his guards to kill Vader. They're wildly capable. They're like the Emperor's personal guard. They're incredibly capable. But honestly, the Emperor never expected that to happen. And in fact, one of the things that happens is, of course, Vader dons his lightsaber, uses the Force, and the Emperor strips his lightsaber away and is like, no. And of course, what's really cool here is even without his lightsaber, Vader's still a force to be reckoned with. And that's one of the things that people have a tendency to sort of forget when it comes to Darth Vader, that in terms of like mobility and maneuverability and being able to fight in the same capacity that he did when he was Anakin, having all those different force stances and so on and so forth, that he's not as capable as he used to be, but he's still powerful as hell. And so you'd have to be some kind of fool to run up on Darth Vader and believe, because he's basically a guy in a metal suit, that he's not as powerful as he was when he was Anakin, and it'd be easy to walk all over him, right? Only a fool would do that. And so literally what happens here is once Vader uses the Force on Mustafar and the Imperial Guards and so on and so forth, that in turn, basically the Emperor uses the Force on him. And that's what he says. It's like, how does it feel to be so weak, right? To feel such pain, to know such fear? Because in essence, the Emperor is giving Vader a taste of what he's given to everybody else. And in the end, well, the response of Vader is like, you lied to me, right? You You lied to me about how it was that Padme Amidala died. The response of the Emperor isn't like, so what? Who cares? It doesn't matter. His response is really interesting here. He says, you proved my point. It was your fear of losing Padme that brought you to my side. I turned your weakness into strength, but now your weakness returns and threatens everything you've gained. So let me teach you fear again and bring you back to power. That from Palpatine's perspective, that fear is really the root of power, right? That fear can be manipulated, it can be controlled. And if you can turn a person to the dark side and you can turn them into your apprentice, you can in turn gain power, right? Like literally, fear leads to power is the philosophy of the Sith. And so what ends up happening here, really Palpatine in the moment says like, forget everything, right? He literally just starts using the Force and breaking Vader's body apart to the point where it's really like his arms, legs, essentially all his machine components are basically eradicated. Not in the sense that it'll kill him, but it reduces him down to his most base form. And he says, you must find yourself again, old friend. You must relearn the primacy of power above all else, or you must die. And so what he does in one of the coolest moments is he takes him back to Mustafar, exactly where Emperor Palpatine found him after his fight with Obi-Wan Kenobi and losing his legs and everything and becoming a crispy critter, and ultimately like drops him off. And it's just like, you will not use the Force, right? You can, there's your lightsaber, right? Use it if you feel like you need to, but you cannot draw on the Force. You have to go strictly by your guts and your fortitude and your strength. Nothing more than that. If you use the Force, I will know. And this whole exercise will come to an end. I will destroy you and I will go find Luke Skywalker myself and I will make him my apprentice. Now, this is a really, really cool concept because I would not call myself an expert on the expanded universe in Star Wars by any standard of measurement. But what I would say is that one of my favorite aspects of the expanded universe was Knights of the Old Republic 2, when it came to, Kreia, who turned out to be a Sith Lord, Darth Treya. But one of the things that she talked about is how feeble both Sith Lords and Jedi were. That if you take away the Force and you take away the lightsaber, what are they? Right? They're just people fumbling around in the dark. They don't know how to use blasters or anything like that. They are wildly incapable. And her belief system, her view of anybody out there looking to become powerful in the Force was to first become the most peak version of themselves they could without the Force, to take their weaknesses and make them strengths so they wouldn't have to rely on the Force in order to become powerful. The Force would complement them. It wouldn't become a crutch. And that's how she saw a lot of Sith and Jedi, that they basically use the Force as a crutch in order to achieve their goals. And so in essence, that's the lesson that Palpatine is teaching Vader here, that the Force, that he's been using it as a crutch in a lot of ways, and that he has to basically regain his roots in terms of understanding just how powerful he is. And so as a result of this, Vader basically makes his way to the ruins of the Techno Union installation, which you guys probably remember from episode 3, which had a lot of machine components, quite literally going there to rebuild himself. But in the midst of it all, and to test him even further, that Emperor Palpatine basically ends up sending Ochi of Bestoon. Now, you guys probably recall this guy, if from nothing else, than Rise of Skywalker, those movies that exist, that people made, and now we're here. That Ochi was basically the guy who held on to, had a wayfinder that they were hunting for, so it was like Lando, and it was Rey, and it was Finn, and they were like racing along the sand to try to find it. You guys would know that scene if you saw it. But like, they were going to find him, right? So basically at that point, he was dead. But at this point in time, he is a Sith assassin. Now, I'm not very well versed in this guy's whole history, so honestly, I'll defer to you all as Star Wars fans down in the comment section to really just provide the information there for this guy, which of course, you know, you'll teach me and you'll teach everybody else. Contrary to what you might believe, I don't know everything about everything ever. There are things that I don't necessarily know, and this is one of those. So there's actually a lot that I don't know. But the cool thing about this is that Vader kind of draws on his own experiences in doing this, right? And I don't really even know if it's necessarily Greg Pak kind of giving us this illustration of like Darth Vader getting back to his roots or anything like that. But it's really just kind of creating a bit of nostalgia for us as the reader, that the last time Vader was here, he was killing everybody, right? He was eradicating what was left of the Separatist group. Basically, any opposition that existed that could stand in the way of what was going on with Emperor Palpatine. Remember, that was the plan, right? That was literally the entire third act of episode 3, is it was basically Palpatine finally making his move as the Emperor, wiping out the Separatists, getting rid of the Jedi. Like, he'd already taken over the Republic, so like the droid army was basically decommissioned and shut down. Anybody out there that could be a threat to the Empire was removed, right? That's basically what that was. It was just a great concept. I love the way it was handled. But that was the last time we were here. So of course, dead bodies are still littered here, which are great callbacks to these stories. But Vader Vader, as you guys know, when he was Anakin, was a prodigious droid builder, right? He was amazing, built C-3PO, built R2-D2, and so that's literally what he starts doing here, is basically building himself. Now, this is when Ochi shows up. Now, again, I don't necessarily know a whole lot about this guy's history, so I don't know if he's supposed to exist a certain way, but I like the way he exists here, because I'm not gonna lie, he kind of reminds me of a less comical Deadpool, and I love it. Right? Like, he shows up here and he's like, I know I'm late. I hope you don't feel patronized. I just really didn't want this to end all too quickly, right? The Emperor said that he'd forbidden you to use the Force, and when I saw you dragging yourself with just one arm across the sand, well, I respected the tenacity. So I figured I would let you take this time to kind of put yourself back together, get back on your own 2 feet, as it were, and I hope you've made good use of your time, because you're fresh out of it, home slice. I love the way he's done here, right? And that's kind of the funny thing, is he becomes somewhat of a comedic character, which I feel like is a great dichotomy in relation to like Darth Vader. Now, of course, a fight breaks out between the two, and it's largely Vader taunting Ochi as much as it is Ochi kind of taunting Vader. But the way that it's written, it's a little ambiguous. Like, could this guy kind of get the upper hand on Darth Vader? He doesn't, right? He literally doesn't. And in the end, it's one of those things where he starts to interrogate this guy, and is like, what is the Emperor planning, right? You've been around him. What's this guy planning? Like, what is it that he wants? And as this goes on, suddenly Ochi starts dropping these small little things. He's like, you can't beat him. He has power, like more power than you can possibly imagine. And I'm not talking about using the Force. I'm not talking about Force lightning or anything like that, right? Like power that's way even beyond your understanding, right? Power that only the Emperor could build. And so that's when Vader's like, wait a minute, build. Well, one doesn't build the Force, right? So obviously there's something else. Like, where is he building this power that you're talking about? And initially, that's when Vader's like a little sketchy about it. Now, of course, the fight that the two of them have ends up leading them to a kind of cave, and there's a sort of disembodied voice that Vader hears as the two of them are basically fighting one another. Of course, by this point, Ochi's basically gotten his hands on Vader's lightsaber, which is kind of cool. Like, literally, Vader throws it, and Ochi just grabs it, which is just a really cool moment. Like, I would love to see that in film form. It just looked awesome. But of course, you know, this basically leads to Vader kind of being collapsed by the rubble, or at least being covered by the rubble, only to survive on the other side. And then in turn, starts making his way to what's called the Eye of Webbish Bog. Now, as I understand this, the Eye of Webbish Bog was created by J.J. Abrams and those guys for the movies, but it was never used. It was a deleted scene. And so in essence, the explanation of what that deleted scene is and like why it exists, the backstory behind that is actually created here, which is a really cool thing, because as far as I'm aware, the Eye of Webbish Bog never existed in the expanded universe. So it's just kind of Disney and those guys creating things for the Star Wars universe as new creations that just never existed before. But the cool thing is that as this conflict and as this fight kind of goes on, of course, the Emperor is listening, is using the Force to monitor everything that's happening, right? To keep an eye on Vader and so on and so forth. But Vader's kind of reliving these own personal experiences, the conflicts he's had before, things along those lines, right? When he killed, when he killed Obi-Wan Kenobi and like Luke Skywalker looked on, and really kind of being haunted by his own memories. But the other part of this is where he's kind of asking questions like, who is this? Like, you know, what's happening here? Like, where he says like I know you're Force sensitive in some capacity, right? I can feel your pull. When Vader's like, who are you? The response he gets is like, who are you? Right? Do you even know? Have you decided who you are? Right? Has your choice been made for you? Or have you chosen? Right? Like, is the Emperor determining your fate, or are you determining your fate yourself? If you could choose, would you have been the chosen one? Right? Would you have been the one who was supposed to bring balance to the Force? Or would you choose to make your own choices? And you would either decide to leave the Force or to move closer to the Force to step into that role. And that's when Vader, like, he gets a lot of these cryptic things. And because it's being spoken about in such a cryptic way, his initial idea is you're basically like, you work for the Emperor, right? And that's when the response of Webbish Bog is like, no, like, I do not work directly for your Emperor. Like, I am kind of basically doing my own thing, right? I don't really have a role in that. But in the end, there's not really any answers given. It's really just a series of questions here. The Webbish Bog even says that you came here for answers. I gave you only questions. I leave you with one more. And he presents him with a wayfinder and says, do you think you passed this test or failed it? And again, that's kind of the cool thing, is it's very, very mysterious. But the big takeaway is getting this wayfinder basically leads him to where it is that the Emperor is building, you know, using all this power and all that kind of stuff. Another fight breaks out between Vader and Ochi, along with basically this kind of droid assassin group. not the most important thing ever, right? Vader overcomes these guys and basically uses some of their components to enhance his body, rebuild himself a little bit, right? So he's not walking around in what are basically Walmart robot parts in effect, right? But nonetheless, right? I mean, these are all dated things. This is stuff from like 20 years ago. These the components that he's using at the moment. By using these more modern droids, he kind of upgrades himself a little bit. But again, taking these guys out, not the most important thing. At that point, he basically snatches up Ochi and is like, "You're coming with me," right? And literally throws him in like this pod, and then encloses him in, and just like connects the Wayfinder to the navigation of his vessel, and then takes off. Now, the funny thing is, like, at that point, Ochi starts freaking out because they're literally going to like a hyperdrive dock, and he's like, "This pod was not designed for that, Vader. This thing could like fall apart. It could disintegrate. Any number of things could happen when you're traveling at faster than light speed. This is not okay." And like Vader's just like, "I don't care," and they just take off. So literally, Ochi's just screaming for his life, afraid that at any moment the pod is just gonna break apart in hyperspace and he'll be scattered across the stars. So it's a pretty horrifying concept. But the other cool thing that's going on here is that one of Emperor Palpatine's most significant aides is here, which is a woman by the name of Sly Moore, who's also an Umbara. Now, even if you don't know her name, you've seen her before. If you remember in episodes 1, 2, and 3, where you basically had that bald chick who had those crazy looking eyes, who basically hung out alongside Emperor Palpatine, or really when he was just Chancellor Palpatine, before people knew he was a Sith Lord, that's her. So it's cool to see that like she continues on. Now, she had a very instrumental role in helping him rise to power because she is a Force sensitive, a Force adept, and she has the ability to control the minds of others. So she's not necessarily on the same level of power as somebody like Palpatine, or I would even say she's not on the same level as Vader, but she's still highly capable and is really one of his closest confidants. And so that's one of the things, is because where Ochi basically is viewed to have failed, she's the one now with the task of taking out Vader. So it's a cool little thing to see. I love that, right? I think it's a cool concept. Now, of course, at that point, they literally just start firing off, like her and these two other Star Destroyers just start firing off like all these different TIE fighters. And of course, as you would expect, Vader just starts eliminating them, right? With just seemingly the greatest of ease, because let's be honest with ourselves, Vader's probably the best pilot in the galaxy at this point in time, right? He's just ridiculously capable. But of course, there's also just this gigantic monster that exists out there. Now, the way it's explained by Sly Moore is that these are, or at least this is a subspecies of what's called the Suma Verminoth, which I'm not 100% sure if we've seen those frequently. Maybe we have. Somebody else could specify if that was the case or not. But the Suma Verminoth, those things are massive, right? They're like 4.5 miles long. Like, they're just huge, right? They're largely born in space. They just consume seemingly everything that comes within their path. This particular subspecies, I think this is like the only time we ever see this. But basically, the way this thing exists is to literally hunt its own kind. And so in order to achieve that, the way it's explained by Sly Moore is that it basically started developing the ability to launch psychic attacks. And in doing that, it could likely just shock the mind of its own kind and then consume and destroy them. But this one just kind of exists out there as what's really more of a protector for what Emperor Palpatine has. Likely it's being manipulated through the Force or something along those lines. But when Vader and his guys, or really Vader and Ochi, take off because of just the sheer number of TIE fighters that they can't overcome, they end up flying directly into the path of this thing, which of course immediately starts, attacking the TIE fighters and destroying them, but launches a psychic attack against Darth Vader. Now, the cool thing here, and really the way this is done, it's phenomenal, because when Vader is confronted with this psychic attack, he has these own visions, right? These kind of memory recollections where he recalls, standing over Luke Skywalker, where he says, like, "The Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you are not a Jedi yet," right? Like, probably one of Darth Vader's most iconic lines from the entire Star Wars franchise. Of course, the moment when you have Obi-Wan Kenobi standing over Vader, different things on those lines, back when he's Anakin, cutting off the hand of Luke. But one of the cool things is that because of the nature of this psychic attack, that it kind of seems to go back and forth. Now, what ends up going on here is Luke Skywalker, as you guys know from Return of the Jedi, cuts off the hand of Darth Vader and confronts him. And that in the end, where Darth Vader besieges Luke Skywalker and is like, "No, right? Please do not do this. You can destroy the Emperor. He has foreseen this. It's your destiny. Join me. And together, as father and son, we can rule the galaxy," that Luke Skywalker kills Darth Vader. And that when that happens, he full on becomes the new apprentice of basically Emperor Palpatine. And so that seems to be the driving force, especially going forward, behind why it is that Darth Vader works so hard to keep Luke Skywalker from falling into the service of Emperor Palpatine. Now, again, a lot of what goes on with that is really him saying, like, we can rule everything, right? The rule of two when it comes to the Sith, one master, one apprentice. Together, you and I can kill the Emperor, and then in turn, we can rule together. I will be the master, you will be the apprentice, and we'll rule the galaxy together. So it's not as one of those things where he's like, we can kill the Emperor, Luke, and then free the galaxy. That's not really what he says. You guys know that, right? Just from the various histories that are there. But once they pass through that whole situation and they arrive on this planet called Exegol, which you guys know from basically Rise of Skywalker, that it's a cool thing there, right? That when they get there, it's like, okay, we both experienced this vision. Ochi never really talks about what happened. Of course, seemingly we already know just from, Rise of Skywalker and so on and so forth. But when this giant monster shows up, that Vader actually does what he's not supposed to do. And he taps into the Force and uses it to ensnare this thing. And when that happens, he literally uses it as a mode of transportation and rides over to where the Emperor is at and then demands the Emperor show himself. Now, this is one of the things that I really loved about Palpatine. Like Palpatine, this guy is basically fearless. And a lot of it just seems to be how powerful he is. But I would say more so than that, it's rooted in how well he knows Darth Vader. Right? If this was just like a random person who was really powerful in the Force and just showed up here and maybe they had killed Darth Vader and now they're confronting Emperor Palpatine, right? Just some OP Jedi that escaped his view by one reason or another, you might see a little shudder of fear. But here, this dude's just fearless, right? He's just like, literally, like Vader is just like, I am not your apprentice anymore. And Palpatine's like, I mean, okay, sure, yeah, I guess. And then just like destroys the thing, like the giant beast. And Vader just comes crashing down to the earth. And he's like, you were saying, right? Like, I mean, come on, dude. I'm Emperor Palpatine's son. It's gonna take more than a tentacle monster to scare me. And so the funny thing is what Vader's wanted to know all this time is what is Palpatine working on? And because we know that Palpatine effectively has the upper hand between the two of them, and because of the fact that that really Vader's curiosity is running high more than anything else, he's like, come with me, right? I know you sense a kind of pain that exists inside this place, but come with me. And what we get to a degree is kind of what we already saw in Rise of Skywalker, right? Like the giant statues and, the tanks that contain these beings that Palpatine was basically trying to create. Ultimately, Palpatine creating clones of himself, essentially. The hand of Luke Skywalker's just hovering there, which is kind of weird. But one of the other things that Palpatine has been working on is basically a series of beings that are wildly powerful in the dark side of the Force and essentially could challenge or really could replace Darth Vader should he fall. They're not really Sith, but in the end, they would basically serve the same purpose, right? Like that's literally what Palpatine says, like they could be should you fall. And the response of Vader is like, I will not fall, and literally goes through and just clears all these guys out, right? Just like kills all these guys. At that point, you have the dark side cultists who come running out, and Vader uses the Force to snatch all their daggers out of their hands and then kill them with them all. I mean, the guy literally demonstrates himself to just be a one-man army here that just shows up and just starts crushing everybody. Now, a lot of that's also because Palpatine's not stopping him, right? If anything, like Darth Vader is just using violence to achieve his ends. And as you guys know, using violence in relation to the Force, that's how you fall to the dark side or maintain a connection to the dark side. And so ultimately, what Vader's really demonstrating here to Palpatine, if nothing else, is that he's not gone back to the light side. And so that's why Palpatine's just kind of like, okay, we'll sort of let these things go on. But this is when Palpatine reveals to Vader what we discovered in Rise of Skywalker, that he's building all these new Star Destroyers, right? 1,000 times more powerful than the galaxy's ever seen before, each one with a cannon powerful enough to destroy a world, right? So literally just eliminate any and all opposition. But the big question that was being asked here that Vader was really curious about is, how is all this being powered, right? How is all this being done? And that's when essentially Palpatine keeps moving forward, and Vader and Ochi basically end up traveling into this source of power, which turns out to be a giant Kyber crystal. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Kyber crystals are living organisms, right? They're like a living mineral. And that in the end, whenever it comes to a person training, whether they're a Sith or they are a Jedi, Kyber crystals are used with their lightsabers. Now, initially, it was just a Kyber crystal powers lightsaber, and that was it. The expanded universe in Star Wars actually adjusted that, so depending on what kind of Kyber crystal you have, you can actually have different properties with a lightsaber. So Darth Vader's lightsaber using his Kyber crystals is different from the lightsaber of Luke Skywalker using his Kyber crystals. And that was a way to explain in the Star Wars mythos how it is that one lightsaber is quote unquote stronger than another. that kind of a thing, why lightsabers have different properties, different effects the lightsaber can have. So again, it's a cool thing, but in effect, because the Kyber crystal is a living organism, each time a piece of it is cut, it quite literally cries out in the Force. Now, the thing about this is that when this lightsaber crystal is cut and it sends off this massive shock of energy, what it does is it blows off the helmet of Ochi and then incinerates his eyes. And that's why he ends up having those crazy little eye devices that you basically saw him with in future depictions. But quite literally, there's a point where Vader tries to tap into the power of the Kyber crystal and use it. And in the end, the Emperor realizes what it is he's trying to do, and he's like, that's ridiculous, right? This is the kind of power that I have, Vader. Like the power of a Kyber crystal, unlimited power here. You cannot stop me. There's no conceivable way for you to destroy me. So this pain that you feel, this emotional, mental, physical pain that you experience, if you walk with me and keep this power, you will forever know this pain, right? So long as you live, you will experience this pain over and over and over again, but you will have this level of power. You will be able to utilize this kind of power. I will let you. The unspoken agreement here is not enough to destroy me, but enough to have a level of power that you've never had before. Or you can turn against me and you can be destroyed. And so of course, if for no other reason than self-preservation, but really more due to the fact that it's just a huge amount of power that's available to him, that in the end, Darth Vader sides with Emperor Palpatine. But one of the cool things about this, and this is where I would really argue Vader is still on the path to joining the light side, is this presents a level of power that Vader can use to kill the Emperor. Because as you guys know, even when it comes to the rule of two and the Sith, the goal of the apprentice is at all times to kill his master or her master, and then ascend to the role of master and take their own apprentice. That's like the governing principles of the Sith. It's the natural order of things, right? It's literally what Palpatine leans into. That's why he allows Vader to do the kind of things that he does, why he doesn't really stand against Vader whenever Vader gets like hyper violent or anything like that. Because if Vader demonstrates his power is growing, or he demonstrates he's becoming more capable, and he basically becomes powerful enough to strike down Emperor Palpatine, I mean, while Palpatine won't just stand by and let it happen, if Vader's powerful enough to destroy Palpatine, then it means he is more powerful and he is the rightful ruler of the Sith and the Empire. So it's a cool thing. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section about the Darth Vader comics, because it's crazy. And yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.